I'm Avery Caldwell, 32 years old, standing in the mirror with my heart thudding in my chest and a navy blue dress hugging my frame like a second skin of expectations. Tomorrow is the Caldwell family reunion, a yearly performance disguised as tradition. And this time I'm bringing a prop I hope will finally change the script to brand new Mercedes S-Class, ribboned and gleaming, the keys sitting like an apology in a black velvet box. It cost more than I want to admit and represents more than I should ever have to give. But what's a six-figure car if it finally gets my father to look me in the eye and say I did something right? The truth is, I've spent my entire adult life trying to win a game I was never invited to play, against rules I didn't write, under a referee who never once clapped for me. My father, Bernard Caldwell, built Caldwell Properties from a single duplex in Buffalo to a multi-million-dollar empire in upstate New York. He talks about legacy more than he talks about love, about foundations more than feelings. To him, life is a series of check boxes that men like my brother Ethan get to check off just by showing up. Ethan went to Dad's alma mater, joined the family business, and made partner in record time. I went to Columbia on scholarship, worked 3 jobs to survive, and now I'm one of the youngest senior investment strategists at a Fortune 500 firm in Manhattan. My father's reaction when I told him, "Just don't get too cocky, Avery. That stuff crashes hard." My mother, Diane, plays the role of warm peacekeeper, but she's a chameleon. In Dad's presence, she shrinks like she's afraid her own light will offend him. My younger sister, Camille, floats through it all like she's allergic to conflict, charming everyone with soft eyes and softer opinions. She means well, but she's learned to keep her head down and her voice softer than the man who signs the checks. Growing up, I used to wonder if I was just defective, the only one who couldn't decode what he wanted. I thought if I worked harder, earned more, shined brighter, he'd finally see me. But now I know better. Now I have proof. 3 months ago, I took one of those mail-in DNA kits just for fun, just to see if that German-Irish thing we always joked about was real. What came back wasn't a fun family fact. It was a mismatch. A biological impossibility. I wasn't Bernard Caldwell's daughter. At first, I thought it had to be an error, but 2 more tests confirmed it. And then, on a visit home, I swiped his hairbrush, sent it in, and got the truth in cold, sterile letters. We don't share DNA, not even close. I put the results in a white envelope and carried them like a ghost in my purse, not sure if I wanted to haunt anyone with them just yet. But then I had the idea about the car. Maybe, I thought, maybe if I give him something no one else has, he'll give me what I've never had. So I bought it. I customized it. I handpicked the trim and the color and the ridiculous stereo system. And I arranged to have it delivered to their house the day before the reunion. The drive up to Buffalo felt endless. Even in the rental car, I barely noticed through the fog of my thoughts. The Mercedes would be waiting at a local dealership, and I'd be picking it up in the morning before heading to my parents' house. When I arrived at the hotel, I stared at the envelope again, wondering if tomorrow was the day I'd finally stop pretending. At 10 the next morning, I drove the Mercedes to their house. It was a beast of a machine, silent and elegant, much like the woman I've been trying to become smooth, efficient, hard to read. My dad opened the door in a polo shirt and khakis, posture stiff as ever. "Avery," he said, glancing at his watch like I'd shown up too early to my own performance. "Reunion's tomorrow." "I know," I said, holding out the box with the key fob. "This is an early Father's Day gift." He took it without enthusiasm, opened it, and stared for a second. "What is this, a joke?" "No," I said, "it's yours. I wanted to do something nice. For you." I watched his eyes flick past me to the gleaming black S-Class parked in the driveway. His eyebrows lifted slightly, and for a moment I thought, here it is. This is the moment he says it, that four-word phrase I've waited 3 decades to hear. But no. Instead, he circled the car once, muttered something about overpaying, and said, "You must be doing really well, or really careless." He parked the car in the garage. I drove my rental to my hotel in silence, barely aware of the traffic. That night, I called my best friend Naomi and told her everything, the car, the DNA, the endless damn disappointment. She was quiet for a second, then said, "You realize he's never going to give you what you want, right?" "What if the envelope changes that?" I whispered. "What if he's been cruel because he knew I wasn't his?" "And what if he's just cruel?" she asked. "Don't confuse your hurt with his history. He made a choice, Avery, to treat you this way." I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, flipping the envelope over in my hand like it might whisper instructions. Should I hand it to him during dinner? Leave it on his pillow? Burn it? Run? The next day, I wore the dress. I pinned my hair just the way he likes, neat and unthreatening. I painted on the smile I wear at boardroom tables and funerals. The Caldwell house was already swarming with guests. Fancy cars lined the curved driveway, and my Mercedes was front and center, like a showroom model for a dealership he didn't own. My mother hugged me like everything was fine. "You look wonderful, sweetheart," she said, then leaned in and whispered, "Your father's been showing everyone the car." "Really?" I said. "Funny. He didn't even say thank you." "Well, you know how he is," she murmured, adjusting my necklace like I was her doll instead of her daughter. In the living room, Ethan stood next to our father, laughing at some story about a real estate deal gone wrong. Camille floated nearby, sipping white wine and not making waves. I stepped inside and waited. Waited for him to say something, anything. "Avery," he said, finally, like he was reading a name off a list. "Glad you could make it." That was all. That was everything. I felt the envelope in my purse like a live wire, burning against my side. If he couldn't see me after this, after the car, after the years, after everything, then maybe he never would. Or maybe, just maybe, he already had. And it had nothing to do with me at all. The dinner was set like a wedding banquet without the joy. Polished silverware gleamed under soft chandeliers, and every glass was perfectly aligned, a cathedral of control built in Bernard Caldwell's image. Guests were already seated, murmuring through champagne sips and family gossip, and I felt the familiar tightness return to my ribs, the sensation of stepping into a room where I'd already failed before opening my mouth. My name card was predictably placed halfway down the table, far from the power center where my father presided beside Ethan and his immaculate wife, Vanessa. Camille sat across from me, already halfway through her wine, eyes soft with the empathy she never voiced aloud. The only seat closer to the kitchen than mine was occupied by a distant cousin who'd once been caught stealing silverware at a different family event. It didn't matter that I had helped negotiate a $200 million deal last month. In this house, I was still the daughter who chose finance over family, ambition over decorum, truth over loyalty. My mother flitted between guests with a hostess's grace, pausing just long enough behind my chair to whisper, "He liked the gesture, Avery, even if he won't say it." I didn't answer. I was too busy watching him at the head of the table, laughing loudly at a joke I hadn't heard. eyes gleaming with the kind of pride he reserved exclusively for Ethan. When the appetizers were cleared, he stood with a glass of wine in hand and tapped the side of it with a spoon. All conversation stopped. Everyone looked up, expectant. "Thank you all for coming," he began, the low rumble of his voice rolling across the table like a tide. "It means a lot to have everyone here to celebrate family, legacy, and a name we've built through hard work and commitment to each other." I braced myself. This part was always scripted. He would toast Ethan's latest acquisition, acknowledge Camille's volunteer work, and then make a vague mention of me that managed to diminish everything I'd done without sounding overtly cruel. This year, he changed it up. "Ethan," he said, lifting his glass, "your project in Elmhurst is the boldest move we've made in a decade. I trust it will be as successful as everything else you've touched." Ethan grinned modestly and dipped his head. "Camille," our father continued, "your work with the youth center shows this family has heart as well as grit. Your mother and I are proud of your commitment to giving back." She smiled demurely and said, "Thank you, Dad," the words dropping like petals into silence. Then came the turn I always dreaded. His eyes landed on me, and I felt the whole table shift toward me, not in body but in awareness, like heat focusing on a single target. "And Avery," he said, pausing as though the word itself required digestion. "What can I say? You've always gone your own way." A few nervous chuckles. "You bought me a car this weekend, which was unexpected. Generous, if maybe a little excessive. But it proves something I've said all along. That success isn't just about numbers. It's about knowing your place and understanding that no matter how far you go, family is the only legacy that lasts." It sounded like praise until you chewed through the subtext. Knowing your place, no matter how far you go. I wanted to laugh, scream, flip the table. Instead, I raised my glass, met his gaze, and said, "To family." The toast echoed hollow through the room, the kind of ceremonial performance that held no real substance, just tradition reinforced through repetition. Over the next hour, I drifted through conversations with second cousins and business partners I barely remembered, all of them eager to hear about the car, my job, New York. Every question was the same, every smile faintly patronizing. I felt like a museum piece, exhibited for a day, then returned to storage. When dessert arrived, some overcomplicated thing, with edible gold leaf, Ethan made a show of standing and delivering his own toast. "To Dad," he said, lifting his glass again, "for teaching us that real success isn't just about money or prestige, but about building something that lasts. You gave us more than a name. You gave us purpose." I almost choked on my wine. I didn't remember being given anything except criticism, comparison, and silence. The applause that followed his speech was thunderous. And then something strange happened. Bernard stood again, as if something about the moment required a final stroke. "I've always said," he began, "that leadership runs in the blood. It's something you either have or you don't. And looking at my son," he placed a firm hand on Ethan's shoulder, "I know the Caldwell legacy is safe." That was it. No mention of Camille's quiet intelligence. No gesture to my work. Just the bloodline, the name, the heir. I sat very still. My hand went to my purse almost of its own accord, fingers brushing the envelope like it might burn a hole straight through the leather. Camille looked at me and mouthed, "Don't." But her eyes said something else entirely. They said, "I see it now. I'm sorry. I didn't plan what happened next. I didn't have a speech in mind. I just stood, the scraping of my chair like a record scratch that drew every eye. I walked calmly toward the head of the table, set the envelope in front of him, and said, "You're right, Dad. Leadership does run in the blood, but not always in the blood you think." His brow furrowed. "What's this?" "Open it." I stepped back, watched him break the seal, watched his hands tremble as he unfolded the document, watched the blood drain from his face like someone had pulled a plug in the center of him. For the first time in my life, Bernard Caldwell was speechless. "You've known," I said, voice steady. "You've always known that I wasn't yours. Not really. That's why it was never enough." Gasps echoed. My mother's face crumpled. Camille whispered, "Oh my God," and Ethan just froze. Bernard tried to speak, but no words came out. I turned without another word and walked out of the dining room, heels clicking on marble like punctuation marks. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I felt weightless, like I'd finally handed off a burden I should never have been made to carry in the first place. I didn't know what came next. But for the first time in my life, it would be mine. The air outside was colder than I remembered, or maybe it just felt that way after the heat of humiliation and fury I had left inside. The lights from the Caldwell estate stretched behind me, golden and soft through the windows, disguising the sharp edges of what had just shattered within its walls. I stood next to the Mercedes for a moment, my breath visible in the dusk, wondering how long I had been holding it all in. The silence after a storm is always heavier than the storm itself. I got into the car with trembling hands, started the engine, and rolled slowly out of the driveway, feeling like every inch I gained from that house was an inch of oxygen returning to my lungs. I didn't have a destination. I just drove, past familiar streets where I'd once learned to ride a bike, past the country club gates that had always been open for Ethan and tightly closed to me, past the ice cream shop where I'd once overheard my father tell someone I was too sensitive, too emotional, too much like her. I didn't know then who he meant. I did now. I drove until the houses grew smaller and further apart, until the GPS on the dashboard stopped suggesting turns and began recalculating endlessly. I pulled into a quiet overlook off a winding road, the kind of place teenagers came to drink cheap beer and dream about leaving. I sat there, alone, with the engine ticking as it cooled, and let the silence stretch. My phone buzzed for the 5th time in 10 minutes. Sophia again, then Camille, then Ethan, then unknown number. I let them all go unanswered. I needed the silence more than explanations. I stared out at the city below, glittering and unbothered. Somewhere down there, people were ordering takeout, binge-watching shows, planning baby showers, sending passive-aggressive emails. Life went on, oblivious. But mine had cracked open like an egg dropped on marble. I took the DNA report out of my purse, unfolded it again under the dome light. No surprise anymore. Just confirmation. I wasn't Bernard Caldwell's biological daughter. I was someone else's. The document didn't name a father, just eliminated the only one I'd ever known. The absence was louder than any name could have been. What do you do when the man whose approval you've spent your entire life chasing turns out never to have been obligated to love you in the first place? And worse, when he's known all along and chose to punish you for it silently. The betrayal wasn't just personal. It was architectural, foundational. The walls of who I thought I was couldn't hold any more. I didn't cry. That surprised me. I thought I might, but grief had done something else, hardened into clarity. I picked up my phone. No more dodging. I needed one voice, one person. I dialed Camille. She answered on the first ring. "Avery," she breathed, like she wasn't sure I'd call. "Where are you?" "Does it matter?" I said, my voice calmer than I felt. He knew, Camille. He knew, and he still treated me like I failed him, like I never quite measured up, because I couldn't, not when I wasn't even part of his bloodline. "He's in the study," she said softly. "Ethan's trying to get him to come out. Mom's, she's a mess. I think she's known too. I think they both knew." "So they built an entire life around a lie," I said, "and made me wear it like it was my fault." Camille was quiet for a moment. Then, "Avery, I know it doesn't fix anything, but what you did tonight, I've never seen you stronger, ever. You looked him in the eye and you didn't flinch. I think half the family stopped breathing." "He called me a loser," I said, "in front of everyone. And you handed him the truth," she said, "in front of everyone." That part still hadn't sunk in. I'd made a decision that couldn't be undone, the kind that closes a door forever, no matter who's left knocking. "I'm not going back there tonight," I said. "I don't know if I'll go back at all." "Then come here," she said. "I'll open wine, or whiskey, whatever it takes." "I need to be alone," I said honestly, "just for tonight." "Then be alone," she said, "but not lonely. Call me when you need." I ended the call and leaned my head against the window, the glass cold against my skin. I thought about calling my mother, but I didn't. I wasn't ready. The part of me that still remembered her singing to me when I had the flu at 7 was in direct conflict with the part that had watched her stay silent while Bernard sharpened his words against me year after year. I didn't know if forgiveness would come, or if it should. The next morning, I checked into a downtown hotel under my mother's maiden name. I turned my phone to Do Not Disturb and let the city move around me while I stayed still. I ordered room service and ate in silence. I wrote in my notebook for the first time in years notes about what I'd say if I ever met the man who had fathered me, about the ways in which love becomes a transaction in the absence of truth, about how identity isn't always inherited, it's built, brick by brick, out of every moment you choose yourself. On the second day, I opened my email to find one from a woman named Meredith Holloway. The genetic testing company had a database for anonymous familial matches. She wrote, "I believe we might be half-sisters. I just saw your profile match and the resemblance is impossible to ignore." The email was kind, polite, curious, and it changed everything again. Not because I had a new family, but because it proved I wasn't alone in the wilderness. That blood, as fractured as it might be, still carried possibility. I didn't respond immediately. I let it sit. I needed time. But knowing someone else out there shared my DNA, someone who might not see me as a threat or a mistake, lit something in me I hadn't felt since before the reunion dinner. Hope. On the third night, I walked by the Caldwell estate. I didn't go in. I didn't stop. I just stood at the end of the driveway for a moment, watching the lights flicker through the curtains, imagining the silence inside. Maybe they were still arguing. Maybe they were pretending none of it had happened. Maybe my father, or the man I once thought of as my father, was sitting alone in his study, reading the DNA report for the 100th time, wondering how he had lost control of a narrative he had spent his life authoring. I didn't hate him. Not anymore. I pitied him. because I had walked out into the truth, and he was still inside, defending a lie. I turned and walked back toward the city, toward the noise and the light and the future that no longer required anyone else's permission to begin. 3 weeks passed before I heard from my mother. It came not in a phone call, not in a text message, but in the form of a handwritten letter slipped beneath the door of my apartment. I didn't even know she had my new address. The envelope was ivory, thick, embossed with her name in the corner like it had been ordered years ago for writing thank you notes and party invitations, not for apologies. The handwriting was unmistakable, slanted, elegant, self-conscious in its perfection. Inside, the note was short, just 6 sentences. Avery, I have failed you in ways I am only beginning to understand. I carried silence for too long, thinking it was protection. But silence is not love. I hope you'll meet with me when you are ready. No pressure, just space for the truth. Love, always, Marion. I read it twice. Then again. Not looking for something between the lines, but just trying to understand how a woman who had spent decades arranging flowers and guests and menus had finally decided to arrange vulnerability. I placed the letter on the kitchen counter, made tea, stared at the steam like it could give me an answer. I didn't call her, not yet, but I didn't throw the letter away either. A week later, I received a second email from Meredith Holloway. The subject line read, "Still here if you are." Her tone hadn't changed. Still kind, still respectful, still leaving the door open without demanding I walk through it. She included a photo this time. Herself, at age 34, sitting on a dock, legs crossed, coffee mug in hand. And it was like looking at a mirror from a different life. Same eyes, same jawline, a crease in her left cheek that mirrored mine when she smiled. And suddenly I couldn't breathe. Not from pain, but from the weight of recognition. I responded, cautiously, simply. I said, "I think we are. I'd like to meet." We chose a bookstore, caf in Tribeca, neutral territory, public enough for safety, private enough for the weight of what we were carrying. She arrived 5 minutes early. I watched her from across the street for a full minute before crossing. She was real. She was warm. She stood when I entered, and we hugged before either of us said a word. The conversation that followed was quiet at first, awkward in places, but something clicked. There were gaps, of course, years lived without each other, entire families neither of us could explain in a single afternoon. But there was something else too, a familiarity that went beyond biology. She listened the way I did. She asked questions like they were puzzle pieces. She offered nothing performative, just presence. I told her everything. The dinner, the car, the envelope, the silence afterward. She didn't flinch, just reached across the table and squeezed my wrist gently like she was anchoring me to the present. "He never knew about you," she said of her father, my father, "but if he had, I think you'd have changed his whole life." I didn't know if that was true. I didn't need it to be. It was enough that someone finally said it out loud. Over the next 2 months, Meredith and I built something. It wasn't instant sisterhood, but it was real. We sent book recommendations, we shared voice notes about family dynamics, we joked about inherited stubbornness and our mutual love of black coffee. When she introduced me to her husband and 2 kids, I expected to feel like an outsider. But instead, her daughter looked at me and said, "You laugh like Mommy." And I nearly cried right there in the living room. That one sentence unraveled 30 years of wondering where I belonged. Meanwhile, my relationship with my mother remained complicated. I saw her once. at a small garden in Cambridge where she used to take us when we were little. She wore flats instead of heels. No pearls, no makeup, just herself, unwrapped from the performance. We sat on a bench in the shade and talked for 2 hours. She told me about the man I came from, about the night she realized she was pregnant, about the fear, the shame, the impossible choices. And then she said something that stayed with me. I loved you so much I convinced myself you'd be better off as a Caldwell. I let that sit, let it sting, let it settle. Because now I could understand how love and harm could live in the same house, could be baked into the same decisions, could sound like sacrifice but feel like abandonment. I didn't forgive her right away. Maybe I never fully will, but I told her I'd start over if she was willing to show up without the script. And she nodded, not with certainty, but with hope. As for Bernard Caldwell, I haven't seen him since the dinner. He sent a letter, hand-delivered by his lawyer, not to apologize but to explain. He called it a necessary boundary. He cited deep emotional disruption and a desire to protect the integrity of the family name. I didn't respond, because there was nothing left to salvage. A man who sees family as legacy, not love, doesn't deserve the title of father. I returned the Mercedes, quietly, through my lawyer. No fanfare, just an address and a key. I didn't want a single thread of connection left. And when I did that, it felt less like surrender and more like reclamation. I built a new office. Not a new job, my role at the firm remained, but a physical space filled with pieces of who I really was. A photograph Meredith gave me of the dock. A letter from my mother in a gold frame not to forget, but to remind. A plaque that simply said, "You don't need a name to know who you are." Last month, I was invited to speak at a Women in Finance Summit. I stood on stage, looking out at a room full of ambitious, tired, hopeful women, and I told them a version of my story. Not the DNA test part, not the family dinner explosion, but the part about self-definition. About how we waste too much time auditioning for roles in families that don't recognize our worth. About how sometimes the only approval you need is your own. And when I stepped down, 3 women hugged me with tears in their eyes and said, "You told my story." That mattered more than any raise, any bonus, any validation from a man who could never see me beyond biology. So here's the truth. I'm not the woman who gave away a car for love anymore. I'm not the daughter who hopes for scraps of pride from a father who only offers silence. I'm Avery Caldwell, by name, by choice, by fire. I built this identity from broken glass and forged it in rejection. And now I walk through the world whole. Not because I know exactly where I came from, but because I finally know where I'm going.